Hello and welcome back, everyone. I hope you've got your morning coffee kick. Next up on stage, we've got D. Sriram, Chief Operating Officer of Vpon. Sriram will be speaking to us about unlocking the revenue opportunity of cross-border travelers. Sriram, the stage is all yours.
Okay, morning. Actually, hang on. I should be able to talk from here. Still works, right? Good. And if I don't fall onto this sofa, then I'll be in good shape. So one of the advantages of being the third speaker is that I can make some assumptions about what the first two people will cover, and then I can focus only on what I want to talk about. So actually, my topic today is quite specific, is about using predictive analytics to target cross-border travelers. So predictive analytics sounds like a very big, confusing, complicated word, right? But actually, it's not that complicated. It's really about trying to say, can I analyze the past and predict the future? So for example, if you pick up the newspaper every morning, there is a section called astrology, right? And they'll say things like, today you will meet a tall, dark man who will stand on stage and talk to you for 40 minutes. And that's me. I'm not very tall, but reasonably tall. So that's actually not predictive analytics. That's just guessing. Sometimes it's right, sometimes it's wrong. The whole root of predictive analytics is actually learning from the past data, constantly refining it, and getting to the point where you can make very strong predictions around it. And the whole objective of doing that is what I've put in here as a subtitle is, the objective is to make advertising more targeted, therefore more relevant, and therefore more effective. And that's actually the big topic I want to try and talk about. What I want to try and cover off really, really quickly is just to paint the context, because we're doing this whole seminar about cross-border travelers, and being a logical guy, my first question is why? Why do we care about cross-border travelers? Now, of course, sitting in Singapore, every traveler is a cross-border traveler. If you're coming from Bukit Batok to Bedok, that's not cross-border travel. But if you're coming from outside, yes, you are. So that's one reason. But there are a couple of more. Then I want to spend a fair bit of time on this whole predictive analytics, what it has to do with cross-border. And actually, generally what happens in seminars like this, when we write presentations, we write a lot of case studies saying, we helped L'Oreal to grow their market share from 20% to 80%, or we did this. We don't actually spend enough time explaining to people how it works, what is the data, what is the technology. So I thought today I would spend more time on that instead, because it's actually extremely interesting. And if you look at that, you might start to understand some of the things that are possible, which people are not doing right now. And last of all, of course, is because I understand from the people I've spoken to in the breaks, a lot of you are running businesses here that are trying to attract travelers to them, is really how do you do that? How do you use some of this stuff to actually make it work for you? So why cross-border travelers? And I just have a couple of very quick slides. And when I say cross-border travelers, usually the word that comes out of my mouth right after that is China. It's not only China, but in reality, if we focus on China for now, specifically for Southeast Asia and Singapore, I think that's the most relevant source of cross-border travelers in any case. So this is published research which came out from a tourism research institute last year. And just for half a year, there were 61.9 million outbound visitors. The thing is, whenever you look at China data, there's always a million or a billion hiding behind it. So it's always a huge number. It's increasing rapidly with the previous year. And when people project that kind of number outwards, it becomes scarier and scarier and scarier in terms of its sheer size. And it's very clear that this is going to be one of the most important customer segments for anybody who has anything to do with travel and tourism for the next 5 to 25 years. And I mean, this is the hard fact story, but the other thing I noticed traveling around the world is almost every place in the world which until 5 years ago was very insular, now has created a Chinese ecosystem. So if you go to Italy, there's a customs guy sitting there who will try to speak in Mandarin to make sure he can help Chinese people. Wherever you go in the world, I went to Thailand, I can't speak a word of Thai. So in the past, I could never communicate with anybody. Now I can speak to them in Chinese because a lot of them have learned it. So it's fascinating how there's a Chinese ecosystem being created, which is clearly a sign of how important this segment is becoming, right? And if you look at specifically our own beloved Singapore, we find that after Indonesia, China is the second biggest source of tourist arrivals in this country. And of course, the other big story here is pretty much Singapore. There's a huge, huge influx of people from other parts of the world in any case. If you look specifically at these Chinese travelers, they contribute a big chunk of total tourism receipts. And actually, a lot of that is spent on shopping. And within that, a lot of that is spent on luxury goods. So there was a time I went to a Cartier shop, not to buy anything, but I was getting something fixed. And this guy comes in with a big satchel, and he buys a couple of Cartier bags and some other stuff, and then he pulls stacks and stacks of RMB notes out of his satchel, and he's paying for everything in cash, which is amazing to think about the fact that 10 years ago, I don't think people would have accepted that currency. So all of that is really talking about the importance of cross-border and specifically of Chinese cross-border travelers to business in this part of the world. And I want to try and draw a little bit of a link between that topic and predictive analytics. And actually, before I do that, I guess I have to explain what is predictive analytics. So I'll try and do that very simply. So passive analytics is saying 800 people came to Singapore yesterday. Okay, so what? I mean, it doesn't tell you anything, right? Then if you start getting descriptive and say, well, actually, you know what? 400 of them came on a plane from Beijing, 200 of them came on a plane from such and such a place, 6 of them came by boat, 1 of them swam illegally from Batam, et cetera, then that starts to tell you more about how it happened, why it happened. Then we get to the more interesting part, which is to say, okay, if in the past we have seen these kinds of things, can we predict the future? So for example, can we predict that somebody who goes to the casino is very likely to go to Universal Studios next because it's nearby? Or can we predict that somebody who goes to the casino and has a family will pack the family off to Universal Studios and then they'll spend time at the casino? Stuff like that. So if you start seeing patterns, you can start to predict. And if you start to predict, you can start to build a lot of things around that. The last stage is prescriptive, which is when you understand all this, you start saying, right, how do I deliver a trigger that makes person A, whom I have understood his past behavior, do something that I want him to do? I think the person who has mastered this is Donald Trump. So he stands on stage and he says all kinds of provocative things and he gets people to do exactly what he wants them to do. So he's a genius. We should have him here next time, if he has time, of course. So in the context of the whole travel thing, and this was something Anthony touched upon a bit in his presentation, if you look at it from a marketer's perspective, first of all, if you're a hotel or an airline in Singapore and somebody has already landed in Singapore, it's not that useful to you anymore because they presumably already booked a flight in and a flight out and a hotel. So actually for those kind of customers, you probably want to talk to them before they plan a trip. That's the most relevant audience for you. And that part is really focused a lot on predictive marketing, because if you can, based on people's booking behavior, what travel apps they downloaded, and so on and so forth, start to predict saying, here's a person who is likely to make a trip in the next 1 to 3 months, that's the right time to start talking to them. In-trip reach, if you remember, Anthony said this is the most difficult thing to do, and actually when he said that, I had this evil smile on my face, saying, ha, 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 that's what we are really good at, actually. Because if you live in the world of mobile, this kind of in-the-moment stuff becomes really, really a fantastic differentiator. This is something that's actually very easy to do in the mobile world. So actually, if you are a more specific tourist attraction, then this becomes the most relevant customer segment. And the reason I say this is somebody coming from China to Singapore may have a rough plan, saying, yeah, I'm going to go to the casino, I'm going to buy some Cartier bags, I'm going to take my kids to Universal, I'm going to eat, Singapore chili crab, all this. No, sorry, Sri Lankan chili crab, stuff like that. But they don't necessarily have all those things lined up front. And if you can talk to them in-trip, and if you can predict what they're interested in, you can actually drive a lot of things there. And this is particularly, I think, the space where both descriptive and predictive analytics make a big difference. And the last part, of course, is post-trip. Part of the logic there is you want to target people who've been here before and get them to come back. Part of it also is today's post-trip is tomorrow's pre-trip. So the guy who traveled and came back from somewhere else is presumably your audience for the future when you have something new for them to talk about and think about. So this tends to be mostly in the region of descriptive and predictive again, okay? And so what I want to really talk about is we use all these big words and we say big data, we say predictive analytics. And actually, if you really look at it, all of this is becoming possible because of this intersection of data and technology. And that's what is allowing you to find somebody at a specific moment and deliver them a message or get them to do something because of the technology that they're holding in their hand, which is the mobile phone, right? So I want to spend a little bit of time first explaining how some of this stuff works, because I feel like we don't do enough of that. And the first part of it is really saying, yes, you need data. Now, actually, Anthony spoke for quite a while about research data, and we heard a little bit even from Joanne about research data. And the problem with research data is if I stand here today and I ask you guys, hey, how many of you people are addicted to gambling? Nobody is going to raise their hand, right? I don't think anyone is ever going to raise their hand and say, yeah, I'm addicted to gambling. But if I am able to track where you go and what you do, actually I can start to get a sense of people who are interested, at least, in going to the casino and doing things. So there is a big value in getting data live and real and streaming, and not necessarily having to depend on asking people, because you don't always get necessarily the most accurate representation. So the world we live in, there are lots of data sources. Right up front, what I've written there is an SDK, a software developer's kit, which actually any time that you download an app, a new app, and you like it, right? After 1 or 2 months, they will update you saying, there is a new version available in the App Store. Please update your app. You know what you should do? You should never update your app, because that's the moment at which they figured out they can serve you advertising to make money. And some guy like me wants to get on your phone, and then I will laugh my evil laugh and start serving you advertising. So SDKs are actually the best way to collect data, because you're in somebody's app, therefore you're able to collect a lot of behavioral data. It's actually completely impersonal. So the one thing people shouldn't worry about is being identified. We don't care about who the individuals are. We're interested in patterns. Then, of course, what happens is no single company can have all the SDKs and access to all the apps and all the publishers. So you do data partnerships with other people and get their third-party data. And also, as we work with clients and do campaigns, we are getting their first-party data as well, because we know who's downloading their stuff, who's reacting to their ads, and who's therefore behaving in certain manners. So we take all of this, and it starts getting put through an entire data analytics space, where we have some really, really smart people with PhDs who are called data scientists, and they're pretty amazing guys. I mean, I worked in advertising for 25 years. I never met people that smart. So I look at them and I think, wow, these guys are doing something very, very significant. They are looking at all kinds of variables and starting to understand how to segment audiences and make sense of them. So actually, this is very key. If you look at the figure on the left, you have people of various different types, and it's a very heterogeneous, mixed audience. What happens when we do the data analysis? You can start separating them out into homogeneous segments, which is, first of all, extremely useful. And then each time that we do something with them, what we are trying to figure out is which segments have the best response rates for a specific category or a specific campaign or a specific client of any kind. And ideally, what you want to try and find is segments which have enough volume, so you can reach a large number of people, and segments where people have a relatively high response rate. So out here, we have put a CTR as the variable. It doesn't have to be the only variable. Sometimes you look at conversions, sometimes you look at downloads, whatever. And we, through all this data, are trying to identify the ones which have the best response. And that's where we then try to figure out, how do we get more of these people? How do we get more people of this profile and serve the campaigns there so that we continue to have a very high degree of performance from them? Okay, so that's the logic of it. The very important point I want to make is, in real life, if you come to the office of Vpon or any performance company, not just us, if you go through the office, you will very rarely see charts like this and people studying it. Because you can't do this manually anymore. You can't do this by hand anymore. You and me looking at a chart and trying to make decisions is only a guide. The whole point of this stuff is putting it into a properly configured bidding engine, allows it to learn, allows it to predict, and allows it to continuously refine. And that's how you really get to where you want to go. So, did I go forward or back? I went forward. So just trying to put it back in the context of travel and cross-border travel is how do you make all that stuff that I talked about, which is the way we collect data and the way we segment people and the way we look at which ones are responding. How does that have any relevance in the context of all these things that we said are important for cross-border travel? So actually what I want to try and do here is talk about one specific area just as an example, and there are other examples, but this one is kind of nice because it's pictorial, and I love having people show me these diagrams, and it's better than writing lots of words on slides. So I'm actually going to focus specifically on one type of data, which is LBS, location-based, and show you how in the context of doing cross-border, traveler-based marketing, some of the very, very deep levels of things we can find out from it, and that will actually, I think, help you understand what is possible in this whole space. And the reason I emphasize this so much is I think a lot of people think this in-trip segment is really, really important to reach, and they don't know how. And hopefully when I finish talking about this, you will have some better ideas about that, okay? So this one is just a summary so that I can remember what are all the charts I'm going to talk about. The first one is really, really simple, very straightforward, is where we can look at specific time periods and start to understand where people are going to come from to a specific country. So this is a very gross top-level chart. I'm not breaking it down into a lot. This just says, during the May Day holidays in Taiwan, we saw an increase of 35% of visitor arrivals from China, 13% from Hong Kong, and we could have gone on with obviously other countries. Of course, you can break it up city by city and so on if that's relevant. So that's okay, yeah, of course it's going to increase. It's not so interesting. Where it starts to get interesting is once they land, you are then able to track them based on all those things I talked about, the various data sources, and using LBS to say, where do all these people go? What are all the parts of Taiwan they like to visit? What are the destinations they go to within the country? And you're able to start to build a picture. And this is where it becomes important because now you know for the future you can start to predict what will happen during holiday periods, what kinds of profiles of people go to each place, and so on and so forth. And then what begins to happen is you can really track the travel over the course of the holiday period. So this one is Chinese New Year this time, not May Day. And you can start to check which are the places that get visited more, which are the ones where the number of arrivals has gone up significantly. And it helps you to really begin to plan what's going to happen for them and where they could go. Now you can imagine this in the context of Singapore, which is actually even easier because it's much more compact, or Hong Kong because it's very compact. But even in the case of a country as large as Taiwan, which is a relatively big island, you can do this kind of stuff. Then this part is from Japan. And actually, unfortunately, we've picked a black-on-black theme, so I don't know if you can see the Japan islands in the background. But again, what we are doing is tracking over a few days period in 2015 September, the patterns of people once they all arrive at that central dot, which is Narita, where they go, when they go there, and we're starting to build a pattern of how people travel when they go on holiday in Japan. And of course, there are 4 or 5 different patterns corresponding to 4 or 5 different segments, which we can then use for the purposes of segmenting and marketing and so on and so forth. Now, one sidelight I wanted to talk about a little bit in here was, obviously, the better the quality of your data, the more precise you can get in the analysis. And broadly, if you look at LBS specifically, there's actually 3 ways you can get the data. The best one is if somebody has turned on the GPS on their phone and you can track exactly where they are. Those are the most accurate. The second best is if you can do some kind of a cooperation with the local telco and start to get cell tower by cell tower information. That's pretty accurate. The worst of all is IP addresses, because IP addresses can be totally wrong, right? So what we also try to do over time in each market that we work in is reduce the proportion of our dependence on the IP, which is the green over there. And if you look at the chart on the side, we have actually improved a lot our more primary sources of GPS-based and cell tower-based data, which means our precision is getting much better. So instead of saying, oh, somebody is within an area of 1 square kilometer, that's not very useful. If you can get down to the thing of saying someone is within a 100-meter radius, that's a degree of precision which allows you to do a lot more marketing than you would be able to do otherwise. Now, one of the uses of something like that is this chart, which is unfortunately colored in a very dull way. And you look at the 2 sides of the chart, and if I ask you, what's the difference between them. This is like those things in the newspaper where they say there are 6 differences between these 2 pictures. Can you try and find them? So there is actually quite a significant difference in these 2 pictures. Does anyone want to have a quick guess? Should I lend you my spectacles so you can see the chart? No, okay. So actually, it's very simple. Huh? So the reason we have done it like this, we deliberately want to confuse you. So we put a big, huge Taiwan main island there. The difference is actually down here. And what it really boils down to is, there's a laser pointer here, but I don't know how to use it. If you look on the right-hand side, basically, you see that there is actually a movement happening over here, which we are able to track using all these cell phone-based, cell tower-based data, LBS data. And up on the top, I have very cleverly written a headline in a very tiny font, so you can't read it, which says typhoon night and after typhoon. And what it's doing in this case is just telling you something which common sense would also tell you, is during the typhoon, there were no boats plying between the 2 spots, so nobody was moving. Afterwards, you can see the pattern of people actually moving from spot to spot. Now, the reason I put that up is not to say, isn't that clever? It's not. Of course, you know it's not going to. People are not going to be out in the ocean in a typhoon. But to say that's the degree of precision you can get with LBS. And actually, if you have that degree of precision, you can start to do some really fantastic marketing based on that. And that's the point I want to try and make is, if you look at your business and you look at the movements of cross-border travelers in Singapore and you start thinking, what kind of knowledge could I have about them? And how would I use that to start driving messages of greater relevance to get people to come to my resort or my attraction or my specific art gallery or whatever it is that is the business that you're running? Those are some of the factors I think that make a huge difference. So, of course, it's not just LBS. I'm showing you LBS here as an example. The earlier part of the thing where I talked about data was identifying segments of people who are likely to be interested and then juxtaposing that with location data so you can get even more specific and relevant. So, like I said, it's not that we sit in our office and draw these charts and then people are poring over them trying to come up with insights. I mean, one of the things I find is whenever I do a presentation like this, it creates a wrong expectation from clients that we are going to show up every month and do a 100-page PowerPoint showing them data. Actually, we don't do that because it's not productive. It doesn't really help. What we do is we put all of this data into a machine intelligence, specifically, and we are running campaigns. And actually, every day that you run a campaign, you are seeing which segments are responding. You're trying to identify the variables that define that segment. You're then trying to say, how do I grow this segment size by doing lookalike targeting or whatever? And constantly, you're using that incoming data and that iteration to keep on optimizing and optimizing and optimizing until you get to a really consistent campaign that is producing a certain number of conversions responses every single day. And that's the kind of scenario in which, where if you are trying to drive tourist arrivals into a specific place and you want 500 a day, 1,000 a day, 10,000 a day, that's the kind of approach you need to be able to do it on a very consistent basis. And so this is really the core of what I meant when I was talking about predictive analytics, which is to say, it's not that you take the data and we start coming to your office and saying, we predict that today this will happen. No, we're actually using it to drive marketing behavior. And a big part of that, which is also important for relevance, is serving the right ad to the right person, which was not possible in the days of TV. So in the days of TV, you serve the wrong ad to everybody. Now, actually, you can get very, very relevant and start talking about the correct ads and the correct situation. So I've talked a lot about the data, right? And it feels to me like I used to work in advertising, as very few people in this room might be aware. And in advertising, you generally have 2 kinds of people. You have people who think idea is everything, creative is everything. Then you have people who think data is everything and analysis is everything. And I actually believe both are true and you need both. And it's not just enough to go and have a lot of data. So having the data helps you understand a consumer journey. Having the data helps us to segment and find the most relevant people in the most relevant scenario, and then make predictions on how likely they are to respond. But I think the third part which people miss a lot is making messaging relevant. And this is part of the reason why today we have so many people doing ad blocking. Ad blocking is because you've served me something that makes absolutely no difference to my life, and you took away 30 seconds of my life that I'm never going to get back, and I don't want that to happen again. So if we made messaging more relevant, people would probably not block ads. And actually, this is a big topic that I want to try and make sure becomes a bigger topic in the future, is how do you try and make messaging relevant, especially in the digital world where it's so easy. It's much harder on TV, I understand, but it's actually very easy to do this in digital. So we've talked about all these possibilities, right? And each time I go and meet clients and talk to them about doing this stuff, I realize that it's not always clear to them what should they be doing next, how should they be leveraging this stuff next. And so I thought I'd spend a little bit of time, literally just a minute, because this is pretty much my last slide. And I think what's key really is 3 steps. So the segments and the scenarios are quite important. So it's very important for you as a business to say, here are the kinds of people who would find us relevant and interesting. And actually, it's not enough to just say that. It's also important to go one step further and say, in what situations are they most likely to be interested in talking to us? So you might say that somebody is very interested in going to the casino and playing blackjack. Yes, okay. But actually, that's not something he's going to be thinking about 24/7, hopefully, right? So you want to try and define scenarios in which that's relevant for them when they're doing holiday planning. Or if somebody is interested in wildlife, in what scenarios do you want to talk to them? So it's not like just because they're interested in something, you can talk to them about it whenever you like. So it's a combination of segment targeting and scenario targeting. That's what creates the magic, first of all. And it's really important to have a lot of thought about that upfront based on your business. Then the second step is to say, if we want to collect data like this, where do we get it from? What kinds of data sources are available? And how do we go out and acquire all those things so that we start to build knowledge around that area? So particularly in our case, when we start working with a new client in a new category, initially we may not always have all the data we need. So there's a phase in which we come up with a strategy for what data we need to acquire, and we go and get it. And it's only then that we start to build a campaign on the back of that. The second thing, and this is maybe my biggest criticism of marketing right now, is there are so many times when clients have a totally wishy-washy KPI, which you can't measure properly. So particularly in a world where you have mobile and you have digital, the question is, what do you really want people to do? Do you want them to walk into a store? Do you want them to buy a ticket? What do you want them to do? Not think, not change attitudes. What do you actually want them to do? And the second thing is there a way for this to become an online or a phone-based action rather than an offline action? Because then it's easier to flow the entire thing. If not, how can you connect that consumer outcome to the advertising input? Otherwise, you'll never know what worked and what didn't work. And particularly in a scenario where you're trying to do predictive analytics, being able to make that entire funnel and know what worked and what didn't work is very critical. And the third part, of course, is the creative matching, which is what kind of messaging is most appropriate. How do we refine it? How do we create this DCO type scenario where you've got lots of elements? And here, again, what I want to try and point out diplomatically, if possible, is if you go and work with a very traditional, above-the-line creative agency, they don't know how to do this. They don't live in this world. They don't understand how to make money doing this kind of work. So they tend to focus a lot of their attention on brand building, big idea, campaign ads on TV, and perhaps on print. So actually, some of this stuff, you really need to figure out the guys who are good at doing digital creative, who are good at doing mix and match DCO type creative. And that's a very different field. And if you do that, then you're able to come through this entire process with the right people, trying to do the right KPI on the basis of the right messaging. And that's when you're able to drive learning, able to drive predictability, and therefore able to drive a much higher level of effectiveness. Okay? I think that was pretty much all I wanted to say. So just going to say thank you. And if there are questions, we can do them now. But in any case, we're going straight to the panel discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Sriram.